Hello. So this is an uncharacteristically well-timed distributist live stream. It's also going to be an uncharacteristically short one. Uh, so I'm here. I'm going to be talking to Ray Mursame. This was in light of a recent video that came to surface concerning another YouTuber named Vaush, who I had a sort of, I hesitate to call, debate with about a month ago. And I might play you the clip right now. And Ray Mursame wanted to come on and talk to me about this clip. She had some very strong opinions about it. And if I'm being completely honest, I I didn't really read them because I was like I was on a lunch break, 40 minutes, so it's I and I oftentimes don't really understand what Ray Mursame is trying to convey. But
Yeah, should be here now.
oh hey, how's it going? So welcome Ray. I was just going to play the clip with Vaush to give some context. So
Yep,
Vaush is
feel free.
he's a progressive YouTuber who's quite popular on BreadTube, and I had a debate with him where he called me racist, and he assured me that, in contrast to myself, he was absolutely not in the slightest bit racist. But just last night, he came up with a rather unorthodox opinion about genocide and the acceptability of separation. I'm going to play that right now.
Yep.
Oh, hey, by the way, Vaush is invited to come on, but I have to leave very promptly at 8 p.m. So, in lieu of him showing up,
As far
we
as I
will.
know, he's in another stream right now because he's building a new computer or something.
Okay, well, maybe he can explain this clip, but I'm just going to play this right now.
Girl,
Okay.
that the black girl from the Pokemon got drawn, and now can someone in really quick before we get to the second part of the video, can somebody in chat throw me a link to a picture of the artists drawing the light skin fucking Pokemon lady? What do you think about
Wait for it.
indigenous people like those from North Sentinel Island? These people want to be left alone and kill everyone coming too close. I tend to respect them, but I notice that I struggle to answer the question what to do with a white community that wants to be left alone. Yeah, I don't really value ethno-states in any form. I know this sounds cruel, but I don't really respect the right of any group of people to isolate themselves and kill anyone who comes close, no matter how oppressed they are in the globalist sphere. I think that however that situation has to be handled, it has to be handled incredibly delicately, but I do think that it is a moral wrong for those people to be able to do that. Jin, what do you mean I didn't read your donation? Why? Jin, I just haven't gotten to it. Jin! Also, Jin, you don't need my critique. Jin, you're a substantially better artist than I am. Alright, let me try and find this fucking drama. That's a bad take on the Sentinelese. Wait, why? What about uncontacted indigenous people in general? I'm sorry, my dudes. I treat fucking uncontacted tribes the same fucking ethical brush that I treat all people, which is that I don't like isolationist communities, and I don't like people being able to extrajudicially fucking execute people just for crossing a line in the sand. A dog contacting them will kill them. I'm sorry. You could make this argument for a bunch of really bad things. What you guys are thinking right now is, oh, these people are super extra oppressed, so that means they're exempt. The modern diseases would cause genocide. Well, I'm sorry. I don't accept the right of people to draw lines in the sand and kill people who cross over it under any circumstances. Nope. All right, I'm ready to observe black genocide. What a dumb fuck argument, lol. Bad take. No, 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 no. You guys are making some real stupid fucking statements right now. Don't dig into this. You clearly don't know shit about it. Nope. I do know enough about this to know this for a fact. I don't care if they get genocided because I would rather live in... I'm a rule utilitarian. I would rather live in a world where people are unconditionally not allowed to set up these ethno communities where they isolate themselves and kill people who cross those borders, then I would live in a world where that is allowed to happen, as long as the consequences of breaking it up would be too bad. They have no understanding of the world around them. Well, too bad that doesn't fit into my rule consequentialist framework. You get in an argument with chat like every stream. Yeah, sorry, chat's full of fucking idiots.
Okay, I think that pretty much covers it. So that was what I saw. Essentially, long story short, separatism, I should say, is worse than genocide. And if it comes down between allowing certain isolated communities to live separately from globalism and killing them off with diseases that will wreak havoc on their populations, I guess we're supposed to, under this conception, choose genocide, according to Vaush. I'm told I mispronounced that. Is it Vash or Vaush? I don't know. It has a U in it, so Ray, are you unmuted?
Yeah. So obviously, what's happening here is I think people are actually misinterpreting what Vaush was intending to say. The impression I was getting from what he was saying there is, as you see when he starts out with this, I can't remember the position you started at now, but when he started out, he was saying that he doesn't agree with the idea that you can summarily execute people just for walking onto your territory. And I think that from an indigenous perspective, that is obviously the normal position, that you shouldn't summarily execute people, and it's because you're supposed to show hospitality to the stranger up until the point that they begin to become exploitative or aggressive, and then you have to sort of remove them from the territory without harming them if possible.
This was under the condition that people knew that by coming into this community, you were essentially going to kill them off with diseases. I think, to me, if that's knowledge and someone crosses the boundary...
No, that was what the people in the chat were saying, because at that point he was being trolled by, reactionaries at that point who were putting as the excuse that, oh, what about diseases and so on. So which then he said...
Well, he walked into that, though. He said that he didn't care about that.
Yeah, and that's where I would differ from him on that, because of course they derailed him into making the additional comments that I don't agree with, because obviously Vaush takes the position that you shouldn't actually be able to have self-segregation. Now, obviously, I disagree with him completely on that, but on this strictly on the topic of, is it okay to summarily execute people because they've come onto your territory or you're an uncontacted tribe? I don't think it's okay to summarily execute people. Obviously, it violates their human rights, and it goes against international law. You can't just kill people for crossing your border.
Well, if you're an uncontacted tribe, how would you even know about human rights? I mean, the entire premise of the question seems ridiculous to apply human rights to.
Yeah, I mean, but again, there are still some uncontacted tribes who, if you approach their borders, they would not just summarily execute you.
Well, okay, good for them. I mean, I think just the question
we're just saying that it would be that would be considered to be the correct position, whereas summarily executing people would always be seen as wrong.
I don't think that anyone was commenting on this video. I don't feel that anyone was commenting on this video as an indication about whether people supported capital punishment for crossing borders. I don't know anyone who's in that position. I think the only reason why people were talking about capital punishment was in an instance where the transgression of the borders literally causes genocidal risk to the population being transgressed against. And it seems that Vaush or Vash or whatever his name is so committed to the idea of anti-separatism that he'd just as soon have people be genocided.
Well, I mean, this is one of the things where, of course, if he was going to that extent, then of course I disagree with what he was saying there. But I just want to point out, while we're on this, that everyone is giving this this sort of big response to this, but how do people then gel that with the fact that they themselves have engaged in these activities? And I'll explain what I mean by this. So
yeah, you'll have to clarify what you mean by that.
Yeah, let's say the Americans, or let's say the Russians, because both of these two groups of people actually entered Alaska at some point. So let's say that these people entered Alaska. Are we now to say that white people in general are willing to countenance the idea that they actually shouldn't be in North America at all?
I don't understand what that has to do with anything.
So if you're
Are
saying
you
that
saying that?
self-segregation is actually a thing which should be, and then that each ethnic group should have, total dominance over its own civic space, then should this not apply to every indigenous group of people?
You mean if we were like partitioning the world into ethnostates or some hypothetical like that? I mean,
Yeah, well, I mean, in actuality as well, because many of these people still exist, and yet they have to live side by side with populations that they otherwise wouldn't.
perhaps I'm not following, but we already have countries. And many of those countries, like,
No,
to use a
I'm talking
non-white
about
example,
internal.
Turkey, are composed of people who migrated here in the 15th and 16th centuries.
No, no,
Does
I'm
that
talking
mean they
about
don't
people
have
who were.
borders? Well,
No,
not
I'm talking about
typically.
people who were always there before. So if we
Sure.
talk about the United States, for example, we're talking about indigenous peoples who have been there for 12,000 years, whereas Anglo-Saxons showed up yesterday afternoon. Like, if we're going to go down that path, then why are we also not simultaneously seeing the same persons who were complaining in Vaush's chat saying, okay, maybe there needs to be ceding of American territory to people who were there before? Or why are these guys, for example, policing the southern border of the United States and saying, okay, you as a person of like coming from South America, coming from Central America, or coming from Mexico, or so on, you are not allowed to cross over the border of a continent you've been on for 12,000 years, but sort of white Americans have been there since yesterday afternoon, drawing lines across things and telling people where they can and cannot go.
I
You see how this is a
I can't
contradiction?
speak for other reactionaries, but I have no problem expanding tribal lands, and also I have no problem if Native American tribes want to better police the borders to tribal lands. Actually, I'd outright support that.
Okay. Would you go as far then also to say that that in the Russian Federation should be broken up and that the entirety of Siberia and Kamchatka should be ceded by them, given that they don't own any of these territories by the logic that we're talking about here?
Well, I think I need to know a little bit more about that situation.
Basically, indigenous peoples again had been there for from since the year dot, basically, and Russians showed up in the year. Let me just remember here, in the year 1530. So that was again yesterday
I
afternoon.
generally support separatist movements. I think that's something that I want to, in many ways, normalize because I want people to try strange social experiments and experiments with things that are distinct from global techno capital. I don't see anything wrong with that. There could be some conditions, there could be some political problems with doing that that are pertain to individual circumstances. I'm more familiar with the ones in America than I am, obviously, in Siberia, but, you know,
Yeah,
people
because
will have to
the
clarify.
Russians were quite aggressive as well. I mean, by the time they reached natural land barriers, after having sort of come across everyone else that they had encountered, people started referring to them as the Red Devils because every single time the Russians would show up in a town or a territory that had not had contact with Europeans before, they would essentially just slaughter everyone who they could encounter, and everyone would have to run
Well,
away from
yeah,
them in
I
their
mean,
way.
the Russians were brutal, the Mongols were brutal, the Japanese were brutal. Invading peoples
Well, no,
tend to
I mean
be brutal.
you can't really
And,
make an
you know, this
equivalent on
is,
these things, given that if you're talking about kill counts, I think like
I,
Russia in general seems to have the highest kill count of all.
I don't play this. Let's find the worst people in history and blame them. The Japanese had a terrible reputation for being violent murderers during their period of expansion,
Well,
and they killed millions of people.
The
So,
Japanese expansion was a response to what was already being done by Western
okay,
Europeans.
well then you could frame Russian imperialism as a response
Well, it
to
can't be a
feeling like
response.
they. What do you
Who were they
mean?
responding to?
Who were the Japanese responding to when they invaded Korea? I mean, just, you
Oh,
could do this forever,
they
right?
were responding to a Russian plot, which was seeking to actually establish
Ah,
Russian suzerainty over the Korean Peninsula,
so it was
something
the
that they've been trying
Russians'
to do for,
fault the
for many
Japanese
years.
killed Koreans.
Say
I
again?
don't know. It doesn't make sense to blame the Russians for the Japanese killing Chinese and Koreans. I don't any more than it makes sense to blame, like, you could blame the Germans or the Prussians for the Russians feeling like they had to expand eastward and get more territory. The human reality is like this. There are murders. I just don't think that dividing peoples up into good and bad is going to get you anywhere, really.
It's not a matter of good and bad, but it's a matter of like who actually owns the territory that we're talking about. And I mean, I for one, I mean, I'm not even being hypocritical here. I say, I for one would welcome the idea that if people on the right would like to say that there are territories that actually belong to people, and some other people are on those territories and shouldn't be sort of, maintaining their control over it because it doesn't actually belong to them. Sure, that would be nice, and then everyone could reach a nice agreement. So, for example, if people are willing to say that parts of the United States, for example, should not belong to the United States as we presently know it, by the same logic, we could also say that, Europe is a place where Europeans have lived since Europe has existed, and, maybe that should continue to exist in the way that it does, right? So this is not a one-sided thing. I'm not saying, because I see in the chat, people are sort of yelling, well, abuse at me about how I'm supposedly biased against white people or something. No, white people have their homelands also. They're free to live in them, for example.
Well, okay, but do the Turkish people have to go back to Turkmenistan? I don't understand. How does... I never understood this about trying to... I'm manifestly against trying to deport people or to get to some kind... I'm pro-borders, but I'm against some kind of, like, population... I mean, unless there's some egregious circumstances. I'm typically against large population exchanges in order to get to some state where everyone is back to their original homeland type deal. I mean, I guess you could incentivize people if you want to try to get some kind of voluntary organization. We could talk about that, but I just think generally what's going to happen is if we take borders seriously, then there's going to be new peoples that develop out of the old ones, and we'll go forward from there. I mean, I don't know. I mean, I just don't understand how you're ever going to do this.
Well,
how are you going to...
The only reason we end up at this line of conversation is because you're saying that Vaush's comments constitute genocide, because he's saying
he
that
literally
people
said
have
he
to
didn't
live
care
side by
about
side with
genocide.
each other no matter what. So I'm just saying, okay, what would you call the opposite of that? The only way to realize the opposite of that would be to recognize that multi-ethnic societies aren't going to work, and then draw lines on that basis.
I don't see how saying that you can't genocide people, because I don't see how being against genocide means that we have to do this originalist ethno-state type thing that I don't even understand how it would work, I guess.
Because the way that you all have defined genocide in this case is that if one group of people is being visited or is living side by side with another group of people, then genocide ensues. So, I mean, if you guys believe that, the only way to stop that from happening would be to not have people living side by side.
The genocide that Vaush was talking about was the genocide that would be implicitly caused when an isolated tribe came into contact with the germs that are implicit on Eurasian peoples, or they're everywhere in our biologies. That would very likely lead to the total extinction of those tribes. That's the genocide that was being talked about.
Are we absolutely sure that was the full extent of what their argument was?
I don't know the full... I mean, it's a chat,
because
but that was what they were talking about.
I was thinking that they were intending to say that as a jump point to get down to their usual talking point, which is about what constitutes "quote unquote" white genocide.
They were definitely talking
by them.
They were definitely talking about diseases. They were talking about isolated tribes. They said the first person who arrives will kill them based on their germs. That was explicitly said in the chat. No, I don't know. I'm not against people. I'm not against ethnicities having their own states. I think that's perfectly fine. Most countries, in fact, do. I just don't understand. I don't see how these absolute positions... Vaush seems like he's so against ethno-states that he will literally kill small communities of people to make sure that they exist nowhere. And I'm totally baffled by that position.
Well, that's the part I don't... Yeah, well, obviously, this is the part that I don't agree with Vaush on. That, he seems to have... Yeah, I mean, I agree with you that he seems to have such an aversion to the idea that ethno-states can exist that he's willing to go to the level of saying that no one should have one.
Well, I mean, why can't we just let these questions be handled inside of countries as opposed to developing absolutist notions of... I mean, obviously, different situations pertain in different spaces, right? If you have an isolated tribe, then segregation from the rest of the world is better than the alternative, which is genocide, right? And in some other spaces, then you'd have open, anyone can immigrate here places. I don't see why we have to go one size fits all. this is a big planet. We can have places that are ethnic, or quote unquote ethno states. I hate that word. We can have places that are a monoculture, and we can have other places that are multicultural. It's not that hard. And it's just a matter of getting people places to live where they want to live. And there should be options for
Okay.
people to live anywhere where they want to live.
So, in the context of our countries that are multicultural, would you be okay with the idea that in multicultural states enclaves are created? Like, I'm okay with enclaves, just putting it on the table. Like, are you also okay with that?
Yes, I think. Well, there's many different ways we could go. I think ethnic enclaves is certainly one of them. And it's not like we already have them. We already have ethnic enclaves. They're called First Nations or Native American tribal land. We've done it for 100 years. Nothing
Mhm.
bad's happened. There hasn't been a civil war between Native Americans and the federal government. It's perfectly fine. We know how to do it. Uh, and it works. I mean, I'm not saying that tribal lands don't have problems. There's huge substance
Yeah, I
abuse
was about to
problems.
say.
Well, but would that be fixed by forcing them to immigrate to the inner cities? I just don't think it would be. I think, I think that the tribal, in some sense, having separate political entities for the tribes has brought a lot of money into those communities that can then be used to directly address the unique problems that pertain to those tribes. I just don't see how forcible integration solves any of their problems.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I don't believe in forced integration either. Obviously, this is one of the one of my
Okay, I
sort
mean
of
it seems
pet.
pretty simple to me then, I guess, right? I mean, I'm very amenable to the concept of patchwork, which is more or less what this model is moving towards. If we take it to, I mean, I'm not saying that we have to take the idea of enclaves to sort of like it's, and I hesitate to use this word, this autistic hyperbolic conclusion, the way that Vaush was using sort of like anti-separatism in this talk. But
Hmm.
it is sort of, we are taking a step in that direction, and it's 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 I have no problem with patchwork, I guess.
Hmm. Well, before we go any further, there's one thing which is quite meta that I have to point out. It's been raised to me, although I haven't actually read the title of your stream, that you've actually missed off the first A in my second name.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'll correct that.
Yeah.
Well, I apologize. I
No, no,
think I
it's no
wrote it
problem.
pretty quickly. It was a very impromptu stream. I am also told that I mispronounced Vaush's name. It's pronounced. Why are people writing ones in my chat too? Is that like an
I don't know.
Islamic
They must be
State thing?
voting on something.
Yeah, I don't know. Uh, well, I don't know. Look, guys, I don't have a problem with stopping immigration. It's not. I think that's probably at this stage a good policy. But you know, this is just it's currently not being passed in these Western countries. So that's the reality. Oh, so you want to
Hmm.
get V Monroe on, but is he here? Does he want to go on?
I don't know.
I don't see
They're
him.
saying to bring V on, but I don't see any. I haven't seen any indication that he was asking to come on.
No, I don't have. Yeah, I wish I could get V or Vaush on, but I think they're just giving me a bad time. I don't know. We were talking about a number of things, and I knew I was going to have you on for that slavery reparations debate as well.
Oh
We
yeah.
have about half an hour more. I mean, I don't know if we wanted to talk about it. I was kind of hoping to have a long discussion on this so I could replace the video of that was the original. Like, no one really believes in this stuff. I mean, I
We
don't
got a
know if you
huge
if you want to make your case here. Uh,
well, I mean, we could at some point.
okay,
But first, address our super chat this person has just put in for $5.
yeah. So Patrick, for $5, you seem to have many arguments with Ray, but do progressives agree with Ray? Well, I don't know. To be quite honest,
I think they do.
Patrick. Well, I'm going to make a key distinction, Ray. Um, when white progressives do not agree with you, I find that a lot of, I hate the word people of color because it's a ridiculous conflation of all non-indigenous European groups into a collective that really has no qualities. But a lot of non European progressives, when they're not in the presence of white progressives, have expressed ideas that seem very similar to the ones I hear from Ray Mursame. Uh, is that your experience too, Ray?
Um, well, I mean, it really depends on which kind of progressives you're talking to, because I find that people often conflate certain kinds of like regular liberals with progressives, and so you will come across like conflicts in which progressives will be saying one thing and then liberals will come out and contradict it. So, for example, your regular liberal, for example, loves and adores the idea of integration and will tell stories about bringing
Absolutely.
all the people together and so on, and when you have conversations among progressives, because of the discrete and distinct ways in which history is developed for different ethnic groups and so on, then you get a slightly different conversation. And so I think that would be a tension point on this issue. And so, I mean, the agreement among progressives, I think, is mostly in agreement. But as soon as you expand it to include liberals as well, then the disagreement comes in.
I see what Patrick is saying. I've never heard a white progressive talk glowingly about ethnic enclaves being formalized the way you and I just talked about 5 minutes ago. That's not a very common progressive talking point, at least on the quote unquote white side of progressivism.
I think many of them are not sort of perhaps they don't think it's their place to make a strong opinion one way or the other.
Well, okay, but Ray, I've heard it's not that they have strong opinions about this, and their strong opinions are absolutely positively not, never, no way, no how. Their strong opinions are very much mirrored in this clip from Vaush. They absolutely want to prohibit enclavization to the point where they'll do anything to prevent what they call self-segregation from occurring domestically inside a country.
Well, if you take the United States as an example, I mean, are we absolutely sure that that's what they're doing?
Well, I mean, I don't have the bills right at my hand, but there are many Obama-era bills and bills before that directly targeted self-segregation and enclavization, well, the creation of enclaves among people racially in this country. And that's constantly been a complaint from progressives, at least in higher education.
Oh yes, I hear what you're saying there. But again, that would be a distinction, I think, if you're talking about people creating legislation. That would be a distinction between just your regular style liberal having tension with the progressives, because obviously liberals again believe in integration, whereas obviously progressives are not on that bandwagon. Particularly when you come across the narrative you'll often see, which is that integration is actually a very subtle form of white hegemony. Because of course, when people are integrating, what are they integrating to? They're always integrating to whatever the dominant culture is, which then creates sort of these subcultures where it's kind of like, you have the exact same sort of, say, white American culture, and with white American culture with, like, I don't know, like an Asian twist on it, or white American culture
and
with like an African American twist on it, or something like that.
It's not even what they're integrating to most often, Ray, is not, and this is why I hate the word white, because when a lot of non-European peoples talk about white culture, they're talking about consumeristic shit culture that has little or nothing to do with any traditional European or Christian culture that's worth its salt. They're not, people aren't integrating into high church Catholicism and classical music. They're in fact are more likely to like that stuff in their home countries than they are when they come here. They're integrating into the standard consumeristic anti-culture that people like Patrick Deneen talk about. I think we associate it with white people, but I really don't think it has anything to do with indigenous European peoples.
Yeah, I mean, you may have a good point there. I mean, that may be a good point. I wouldn't call it an anti-culture. It's just a different kind of culture that white people have created, which is different from more traditional ones. But it is still very much their creation.
It was pioneered by people who were categorized as white, certainly. And I think it's been adopted by a lot of other countries. It's more cultural entropy than it is anything else. Sorry, I have another super chat from Adam Morgan for $5. Vaush, and I hope I'm pronouncing that right, still considers you as racist. Well, I don't really give a shit at this point. Yeah, I guess man bun genocide considers me racist. Although that sounds like man bun genocide sounds like an awesome metal band. Also, will either of you does Ray feel the same? Also, do either of you go on suitable for advertisers AA's new program? Well, I'll answer the second
Okay.
part. Suitable for advertisers always comes on when I'm at work. This stream started pretty much right when I got back from work, so I can't do anything that is during that time frame. It does not work for my schedule. I'd love to go on if I could. Uh, I don't really care whether I don't think racist has really very much meaning, so I don't really care if anyone considers me racist or not or whatever. I don't care about these categories like race. They don't interest me. But I'm sure anybody who's opposed to me will hurl any number of meaningless insults. But whatever. But
Mm.
so I'll have to ask, I guess. Um, so do you see the
Well, I mean,
future for?
the second part of the first statement is targeted at me. So apparently, do I feel the same? As far as I'm aware, I am neither sure nor unsure of whether you're racist or not. Like, I don't think I've ever addressed that. So, I mean, I don't know. You'd have to say something on the topic that would convey that to me.
And
But I
I,
don't think I've ever
as a
I don't think I've
principle, I
ever
don't.
accused you of that.
As a principle, I don't talk about race. But I will say that if I had many of your opinions more explicitly on enclavization, I think a lot of progressives would call me that word.
Well, I mean, it would depend on how you presented it. Like, if you presented it the same way that I did, which is to say that you want autonomy for people who have been historically oppressed, so they can essentially work out, um, their way of surviving without having anyone else imposing their way of life on them. I don't think that people would find that to be a horribly racist opinion. I mean, for everyone
I
involved,
don't
that would be an
understand
empowering.
how. I mean, I don't know. I think that a lot of progressives might feel intimidated if they were confronted with this coming from somebody who they felt was from a community that was protected, so to speak. But I don't think
Mm.
they respect that opinion coming from a community that they felt was not protected. Maybe this is a difference in experience,
Maybe, I
but
mean, maybe I'll be a, yes. Maybe they would have knee-jerk reactions. I mean, it's always possible that they might sort of see you coming, as it were, and think that you're up to something.
I don't know. I mean, if the opinion of progressivism is going towards more of a live and let live and a discarding of sort of these universalistic notions, if that's the way progressivism is going, then it seems like it's going more or less in the same direction that the right wing dissident right is going. Maybe there is going to be a coming together at some point.
Mm. Second part of this question: will either of you go on suitable for advertisers academic agents new program? Well, apparently I will not be, and I've said that I won't go on suitable for advertisers, and it's for the following reasons, and I'll list them. The first one is that suitable for advertisers is obviously a piss take from the start because of the way that they've got it structured. It's almost like they're taking the piss out of YouTube by structuring it in the way that they do. Um, there's also the fact that none of those people like me anyway, for reasons which are quite obvious, because I've presented opinions which they disagree with. And
Mm-hmm.
thirdly, on top of that, there's like too much weird conspiracy theory stuff about me personally, which they seem to be engaged in. So, for example, the absolutely ridiculous and stupid position that they've taken, which is that they're now claiming that I'm not Japanese and that I'm in fact some kind of Korean agent. Now, this is like, I don't even know how to begin to address that. Like, how do you prove that you're not a secret Korean agent? Like, if you were me, how would you go about proving that?
I don't know. I guess it's
I
quite
love it.
obvious that I'm not Korean, so it's never really
Yeah,
come
yeah,
up.
yeah. And so, these are the problems. So, no, I
I
don't
have
think I've
this
ever told
problem
people.
sometimes with being accused of being another ethnic group that I somewhat resemble, but certainly I'm not. But which I will certainly not mention on stream for fear of getting this stream taken down. But I guess I'm not totally unfamiliar with conspiracies concerning people's ethnic identities. So
Yeah. Yeah, so no, I don't think that I would. I mean, the only instance in which I would appear unsuitable for advertisers is if like something so dramatic were happening that it became like absolutely necessary. But I can't imagine what that scenario would be.
Um, well, I don't know, Ray. I think I'm kind of out of things to talk about. We came to an agreement way too quickly on this stream. So, uh, what do you? I guess I'm just kind of tossing it back to the chat at this stage. I wasn't really planning on doing a live stream as impromptu, and I wasn't also expecting that we would just kind of get to a truce so quickly. I don't know. I guess I don't necessarily see your form of progressivism as being particularly common, but that's not really here or there. I
Well,
think you're gonna have a harder.
I'll give you an example, actually, just on a humorous note, since I guess we do have some time. But on a humorous note, there is one thing where I ended up essentially being dragged by everyone, from progressives to academic agents people and so on and so forth, like cross spectrum Western dragging, right? And this is the position that I take, which is that in terms of health, like I don't believe this thing about how every body type is somehow magically okay. Like I believe that like if people are fat, that it means that they are actually unhealthy and that something needs to be done about that because they will suffer health complications later if they keep going on that path. Now, I said that in the most diplomatic way possible, okay, on one of academic agents' shows. I think it might have been a year and a bit ago. I said it in the most diplomatic way possible during one of those streams. And these guys got so mad with me and I think have not forgiven me for having said that since then.
Well,
I was accused non-ironically by classical liberals and conservatives of, quote, fat shaming. I actually couldn't believe it was actually coming from them as opposed to coming from progressives, but of course progressives later accused me of the same thing also. It was incredible.
well,
So I mean there are some
I
things where
don't.
basically I'm just like, I don't know.
I don't know how to react to that. You're gonna have to take it up with academic agent, I guess. But oh, we have one super chat from Frederick Voltaire Bastia for $5. Hey Ray, hey Dave. I can't say to watch the show, but I hope you guys enjoy each other. Wow, that sounded weird. Have a good evening. Thank you very much.
He means well. He
Yeah,
means well.
it's gonna be a really short stream. I'm kind of struggling about how to fill the next 20 minutes. Uh, I'm very tempted to go on to reparations. I really am. Uh, here's a super chat.
Oh my
Ray sides
gosh.
often with the neocons. Discuss Patrick for $2. Well, that's interesting because it seems that in the news very prominently today we had Ben Shapiro, who, according to most most leftists on YouTube, is the king of conservatives, go off on how we just needed to bomb Iran, and this was really
Oh yes.
greeted with absolute total disgust by most people on the dissident right. And I get the sense
Yeah.
that there's a changing of the guards coming, and I think people like Ben Shapiro are really going to have no home on the right in very short order. I think the age of the
He's
neocons is
overstepped.
over.
I mean, he
What?
overstepped even from the perspective of neocons, because if you look at the number of neocons who agreed with Ben Shapiro, that number is actually about zero right now. Like maybe it's one or two. Someone have to inform me of it. But as far as I know, Max Boot actually supported the Iran deal, and Bill
What
Kristol
about
himself
isn't like
also
aren't the
does not think that we should
crystals like
attack
on
Iran.
board this? Aren't the crystals on board with this? And
In theory, they think that the Iranian regime needs to be changed, i.e. Bill Kristol thinks that the Iranian regime needs to be changed. He just thinks it shouldn't be changed by direct force imposed by the United States under President Donald Trump. He seems to think that what you're supposed to do is you're supposed to go into the Iran deal, and then you're supposed to do some tricky thing with economics, and then something will happen later on. So I think he wants some kind of internal revolution that the U.S. is supposed to like fund after it starts, or something like this. But none of the sort of big name neocons believe that you're supposed to take U.S. military assets and throw them directly at Iran. None of them think that, which is why Max Boot even had one of those things where I think it was 2 years ago now, where he had some conference thingamajig that was on YouTube or something, and he said that the Iran deal, he thought it was imperfect but should be allowed to stay.
so
And
maybe you
so
could
no, Ben Shapiro
clarify.
has gone off into his own territory of hawkishness on this issue.
Do you feel like you agree with neoconservatives on a lot of things?
Only like stuff where it's on the stuff where it's just like basic reality. So, for example, if neoconservatives say that the war in Afghanistan was the warranted response to the September 11th, 2001 attacks, then sure, I agree with that because it was, right? You're going to sit down there and you're not going to sit down there and let them hit you on 9/11 and then not respond by going to Afghanistan, right? I think everyone, even in the chat, should, I mean, and yourself would agree that the appropriate response was to go after the Taliban for having sheltered Osama bin Laden when he was devising those plans. So on that
I'm
point,
not entirely sure. I think that I kind of come down. That's originally what I thought at the time, but given how little we've done to secure our border, and given how little both Western Europe and America have done in the face of just general threats from the outside domestically, I'm wondering why the heck we started to tear things up in a country on the other side of the globe when we didn't bother to correct any of the problems at home. I don't see what's come out of that.
well, I mean,
Really, what has come out of
problems at home are you
10?
referring to?
It's like 16 years in Afghanistan now, and what do we have to show for it? Like, we control Kabul, and there's Taliban everywhere else. I mean, I don't believe just war theory is based on results, and I don't see very many results.
Well, it hasn't been the fastest possible war that you could imagine, because I mean,
Well, it's been the longest war the America has ever fought.
Difficult.
It's been the longest war America has ever fought. Not the fastest is an understatement.
This is true. I'm thinking of it in terms of like the longer historical arc. Because I mean, for the United Kingdom, for example, I think for the United Kingdom, this would not be the longest war it's ever been in. Whereas I think,
you're talking about the country that fought the 100 Years' War. You're right.
Indeed,
but
indeed.
I don't really feel like fighting 100 Years' War against Afghanistan. Thank you very much. I mean, this isn't Calais.
So the Ministry of Defence did come out with the interesting line. I think it was probably last year.
At least when you seized Aquitaine, you got
this is a generational war.
What?
They're saying this is a generational war. In the United Kingdom, they're saying that this is a generational war and that basically your grandchildren will be the ones inheriting this. And I was thinking, that's interesting. You can never say that in America. They go mad if they heard that one.
Well, it is a generational war. If you had I mean, the child of a soldier who fought in Afghanistan in 2002 is now eligible to serve in the military and fight in Afghanistan in 2019. Right. It is officially a generational war.
Yeah, and sometimes I also find it a little bit shocking sometimes when you encounter some people and you ask them, so, what were you doing on 9/11? And they say to you, like, the funniest things, such as, I was in someone's womb at that point. I didn't exist. Stuff like this, right? And it's like, the next generation has actually come. There are people who are enlisting now who never saw 9/11. They weren't alive when it happened.
Well, I know this doesn't seem to be a winnable. I mean, I don't know. This doesn't seem to have any justification that I've been able to discern in about 10 years of talking about this. And I'm not hearing one now. But I'm going to read a super chat here. Bulba Inquisition for $10. I think he says, given your opinion on separatism, does conservative religious groups have the right to leave nations that are promoting progressive values that go against their religious beliefs? I think I think there's a middle ground between leaving nations and essentially having to assimilate into progressive anti-culture. And I think this needs to be explored. I think it's really the future of the West. And I think Israel has done some things like this where there are groups that are essentially living outside of the mainstream globoculture that occupies places like Tel Aviv, and in many ways are fixing a lot of things in terms of the general demographic sustainability of that nation. But I think that this is just the wave of this is just what's going to happen in the future. Any thoughts?
Well, I mean, I am in two minds on that. Like, I mean, we're talking about people seceding from your country on the basis of ideological disagreement, basically. If they're saying
we're talking about enclaves the same way we were talking about them before.
Oh, right. I mean, I suppose people can do that if they want. I mean, on the
Hmm.
same basis. I mean, you could form an enclave based on anything, hypothetically. I
Yeah.
mean, doesn't the US already have something like that already, where the Mormons basically occupy certain
Well,
areas of?
they not the Mormons. I think you're thinking of the Amish, and they're kind of, to
Well,
my
no, no. I
knowledge,
mean,
they're
the Amish, the obvious
grandfathered.
one. The Amish is the obvious one. I mean, the more subtle one is what Mormons have done, or to say, Church of Latter-day Saints. What they have done, where they have communities where I assume, someone can tell me if I'm wrong, where I assume that in certain parts of the US, where you go there, and it's just like the entire neighborhood is Church of Latter-day Saints.
I Yes, but
Would that be wrong?
I don't think that's governed by any kind of protective covenant. I just think they all happen to live in the Utah area, and this has just been a demographic reality in the same way that, there
Mhm.
are concentrated populations of other religious groups in various areas
Yeah, but I
around the
mean,
United
wouldn't that
States.
result in their But I mean, wouldn't that result in their councillors being elected, also being LDS people, and then also, senators being elected that are LDS, and so on and so forth?
Yes, but that's a different situation
I
than,
mean, if
say,
they're
the
all
Amish
concentrated
have.
in one location, they would end up having representation that reflects their beliefs.
Yeah, I mean, there's always going to be. I mean, I think that you're right. There's sort of a de facto. In some ways, there's a de facto separation in certain areas of the Mormon community. But I don't think that's exact. I think people are talking about one step beyond that. But I have a few more super chats to read, so let me just read this very quickly. Mac Daradensky
Okay.
for $2 says 2 hour mass. Nah, mandatory 12-hour mass. I don't know what that means. 2 hour mass. I think he's talking about the Latin mass, which is usually is about 2 hours. And then we have another $15 super chat. What is the future of Christianity in China, and what does the future mean? What does that future mean for China? I think Christianity is the wild card in China's future. I think I believe that we see in Hong Kong that there are the seeds of resistance against the vision from the party. And I think that a major vector of that resistance will be Christianity. And I hope that it can be an orderly resistance to that vision. Because I think that a lot of people in China, especially in Hong Kong, they don't want this technocratic authoritarianism that's being handed down. And I think that Christianity is a vector for that. And this is why I think building sort of a multi ethnic, multicultural, and in some ways even multi religious, but in this case not, reactionary movement worldwide is the fact that Christians who are dealing with the issues of trying to confront modernity in the West and build up the West inside their own secular communities can aid and learn from Chinese Christians who are trying to do the same against much, much more authoritarian opposition. And we can learn from each other, and we can learn how to be communities in resistance from each other. Even if we do have separate cultures, we can exchange knowledge and learning. So I think that's a really good question. I really wish I knew more about it. I think always my friend Pius would
Mm.
be great because he's quite the xenophile, right?
I would go the other way and say that. I mean, obviously, I'm looking at it from a different perspective, but I would say that the rise of, the spread, not rise, but spread, the spread of Christianity in People's Republic of China is such that, much like how we've seen in previous instances of this particular kind of problem, it's that if the party fails to satisfy the desires of the broad mass of the people, and it results in a sort of falling away of faith in the Chinese Communist Party, then it could be possible that Christianity would be there to sort of catch people's new allegiances,
Mm-hmm.
and then you'll end up with that kind of sort of, I guess you could call it, cultural conflict. But so long as, and I think this is the way that the Chinese Communist Party is viewing it as well, that so long as they can continue to actually spread the gains of development evenly to the people who are now coming up and being developed in the the more far-flung areas of China, for example, and of course, obviously, sustain the lifestyle that people have become used to in the more developed areas of China. So long as they can do that, then they wouldn't have to worry about it, because I think that people would not just suddenly start, sort of professing their allegiance openly unless some great event happens that causes it. So, for example, let's say the world economy crashed, and for some reason Chinese people began to not believe in their own government. Then you might see people begin to believe other things instead. But I don't see a scenario where they're going to suddenly just start doing it just because there is a technocratic government in charge that is watching you through WePay or something. You see what I mean? Because they've already become so inured to that anyway that I think most people on a day-to-day basis, when they're walking around doing their business in China, they don't notice the presence of a so-called overbearing government, for example. It's only once they step outside of what is acceptable discourse, then suddenly they notice its presence.
Yeah, this is the thing. And complacency, chaos is always the opportunity for ideological change. And this is always kind of a risk of... This is why I think people get the sense that chaos is in the barrel. They get the sense that we're seeing the first hints of chaos emerge on the horizon, but it hasn't quite arrived yet. And people are wondering just exactly how much is going to be disrupted ideologically when all this stuff comes to pass. And I think that's really what's kind of captured the imagination of our time. And in many ways, it's what's paralyzing us.
Also, the other thing that people have often not taken into account is that China is fundamentally different from the USSR in that China is actively trying not to make mistakes that the Russians previously made when they had their experiment with developing socialist economy. So, a lot of the common pitfalls of just like doing really dumb things and then getting a backlash, China is more, let's put it this way, China is more savvy in the way that they attempt to do these things.
Are we still calling China a socialist economy?
I'm not saying that China is a socialist economy. I'm saying that basically it's a socialist orientated economy in the sense that the official line is that they are presently developing productive forces through international trade and sort of state capitalist development, which will eventually create the preconditions for socialism. Of course, when you ask when will that come, according to, well, Mao's selected works, they believe that it was supposed to come at some point between the year 2040 and 2090. But of course, again, these are just complete guesses. These are just complete guesses which they're making here. The capitalism will develop to the point where they can't take it any further, and it will suddenly transition.
It's about the same time that all of the bread tubers are promising to have fully automated gay luxury space communism.
That's probably where they've actually gotten their timeline from. Of course, I don't think anyone on the sort of bread tuber side will ever admit that they actually just literally took that out of the book. But I think that's where they've got it from, because I find it to be
out of what book?
And coincidental that they would actually place the date when the crisis is going to happen right at the point where the People's Republic of China believes it's going to happen, which is around 2045. Incidentally, the Australians also believe that for different reasons, because they believe that the population increases in urban centers will create it. So there's a synchronicity on that one, where I think it was
So you're saying
it was a Scowcroft Institute, I think. Scowcroft also believes that 2045 is supposed to be a key year in human development or something for the same reasons, and then they're anticipating that by 2090 you'll have had total systemic change to accommodate the fact that the crises will push people into these positions.
Well,
everyone seems to believe that the outcome is going to be different from what it is. So I'm assuming that bread tubers think that you're going to have some kind of move toward anarchy by the 2090s or something. Whereas obviously China believes that you're going to be moving more toward state socialism by that point. And I think people like Scowcroft and neoliberals and so on think that in 2090 they'll still be having neoliberalism, just with more guns.
I don't know what to say about that. So I have a £1 retracted super chat, so I apologize for that. But let me, since we're heading up on time, I don't want to miss any super chats because I have to end this promptly at 8. So Dreadnought for $2 says, yes, China is making all sorts of new mistakes. Well, I guess.
Well,
yeah, that's a very Chesterton type quote. China is making a lot of new mistakes. I don't know. I don't think China's as stable as it's letting on. And but we'll see. These East Asian regimes tend to just soldier on regardless of what would topple any Western regime. So they tend to be unaccountably stable. But anyway, since we're coming up on the last 5 minutes, do you have anything else you'd like to discuss, Ray?
Yeah, I mean, we did touch on Iran, so I just want to go back to that just a little
Mm-hmm.
bit. But yeah, on this Iran thing, I suppose I should obviously point out, even though obviously people can read my Twitter timeline and see what my position is on this anyway, which is that we're in a really dangerous time right now with this issue of Iran, and I think people were warned before the election in 2016 that it was going to go this way if they elected certain individuals such as Donald J. Trump, and part of the reason that things ended up this way is because Trump actually said with his own mouth, quite near the beginning of this whole saga, that the thing that motivated him to join the race, to join the contest to become the Republican nominee, was because he was upset about the Iran deal. But that was the first thing that drove him to do it, right? And so I think people should not be too surprised now to find that after they have elected him, that he is dealing with this issue, and by dealing with it I mean making a mess of it. So first thing he does is he comes in and he revokes the Iran deal. He just will not comply with it. So now
Mm.
what incentive does Iran have to even pretend that they're going to have this dialogue about
Well,
how much enrichment or how little enrichment there
I
should be
don't
if Iran
doubt that in the
already torn his country down?
campaign. I don't doubt that in the campaign, Donald Trump was making some neoconservative noises. I'm not so sure that Hillary Clinton was our ticket away from neoconservatism at all. I think you just would have. I think you would have gotten another war in Libya.
Well,
So I don't know. I mean, it just seems like six of one, half dozen of the other.
but
Uh,
basically the dynamics of what's happening here now is, sort of Trump yesterday decided he was going to call for an attack against Iran as a response to them shooting down a drone. So I guess they're sort of avenging a machine, which is kind of a strange thing to do. So they went ahead and ordered the attack, and then 10 minutes before the attack was supposed to begin, he revoked that order, and we don't know
very
why he
Trumpian.
chose to do that. We don't know why. Yeah, we don't know why he chose to revoke it. But then he subsequently followed up once daybreak happened. He followed up by sending a message to Iran through. Um, oh goodness, which country does he like to do it through?
Oh,
Well, it's
I
not
don't
Qatar. It's
know.
the other
Saudi
one.
Arabia, who knows? One of the
No,
people who
it's not
hates.
through Saudi Arabia. It's through. No, it must have been Qatar. So he sent a
Sure,
message. He sent a
one of the
message to
Gulf
Iran.
states that hates Iran, right?
No, no, no. One of them that's kind of like on the fence. It would be Qatar, because that's kind of on the fence between the two. Like they have a relationship with Saudi Arabia, but they also have a relationship with
Oh,
Iran.
so they brokered the
Yeah.
ceasefire.
Not it was no, they didn't broker the ceasefire. They passed a message saying that Trump was putting them on a timeline, and that if Iran does not kind of like respond to him in an appropriate fashion within a certain time period, which is actually unspecified, then he will actually have the attack again.
Mm.
So we're on a timeline apparently, except we just don't know how long the timeline is, and we also don't know like what processes that are going on inside of Trump's brain that affect how long he thinks this timeline is. So in other words, the attack could happen again at any time except for real this time.
I don't. I guess I just dislike these people who are lobbying for this war so much, and I don't really see them coming from one party or the other. It just seems like they have their own little hobby horses, and they're galloping off on those. Well,
Yeah.
I
I mean,
have.
if we're
Yeah,
lucky,
go
if
ahead.
we're lucky, if we're lucky, none of this will happen, and we can avoid a disastrous Iran conflict. Because if they initiate this conflict, hear me now, if they initiate this conflict, it's going to, wreak havoc on energy markets. You're going to have trouble in all places in which there are Shia populations, such as even Bahrain, for example, which is where the US Fifth Fleet is actually stationed. So, I mean, why would you do that? But they will burn that to the ground, of course. In fact, a fire will simply be lit across the entire Middle East. I don't think they should engage with Iran on this at all. It would also knock out Iran as a place that you can get natural gas from, which would lead to Russia being empowered as being the only supplier of natural gas to Europe again. So all of these knock-on effects, and of course, obviously, the United States would then also be punished in Afghanistan and would be punished in Iraq as well, given that, again, Iraq has a Shia population. People keep forgetting this for some bizarre reason, even though it's one of the obviously
Mm.
one of the biggest things to note about Iraq itself. So, Iraq, Iran, Afghanistan, Bahrain, and others, Yemen as well, of course, all of these places will, become worse than they already are.
Well, I can end on the anti-interventionist note. I want to have as little to do with these places as humanly possible. So we'll close there because I have to leave promptly. Thank you for joining
Mm.
me, Ray. And maybe we can talk again in the future. So that
Right.
was the very, very short Friday evening live stream. I will probably do another Dis Dance at some point to go on longer topics, probably concerning BreadTube. But I have absolutely no more time tonight, so I'll see everyone in the chat later.